Hello, I'm Frederica Whitfield in the CNN newsroom in Atlanta. Our ongoing coverage of the war in Iraq continues in a few moments. But first, this hour's top developments, in addition to keeping an eye on the breaking news coverage of the suspicious substances found in central Iraq. At least 9 people from 2 families were killed and more than a dozen others were wounded today when a blast rocked in Baghdad neighborhood. That word from CNN sources who went to the scene. People who live in the neighborhood say they believe coalition air raids were to blame. There was no immediate comment from U.S. Central Command. Earlier, CNN viewers watched live as a blast took out a bridge on the outskirts of Baghdad today. U.S. Marines say they destroyed the span because it had become damaged and unsafe in heavy fighting. Marine engineers have since built a temporary replacement. For the 3rd time in nearly 3 weeks, President Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair are meeting face-to-face. The war in Iraq tops the agenda of their 2-day summit in Belfast, Northern Ireland. They'll also be focusing on peace plans in that British province and in the Middle East. Optimism that the war in Iraq will soon be over is fueling a rally on Wall Street. We're 1 hour away from the closing bell, and right now the Dow Jones Industrials are looking rather promising. The Dow is up about 101 points. Continental Airlines announced today it's suspending flights from New York to Hong Kong. The carrier says fear of the potentially deadly severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, has hurt traffic on that route. We'll have more details a little later in the hour. We may be 2 weeks into spring, but it still feels like winter and looks a whole lot like it, too, in much of the Midwest and Northeast. A major storm has already dumped up to a foot of heavy, wet snow in parts of the plains and the Midwest. Parts of the Northeast could see up to a foot of snow today. Well, coming up this hour, a report from the Northern Front in Iraq, where military advances are measured in inches, not miles. Taking it to the streets, we'll take a look at the battle plans for some anti-war protesters. Plus, it may be spring, but it still feels like winter in the Midwest and Northeast. Our forecast coming up. CNN's coverage of the war in Iraq continues right now.
Good afternoon from Washington. I'm Judy Woodruff. U.S. troops today moved forward with efforts to secure the Iraqi capital and struck a symbolic blow against the Iraqi regime. This photograph of U.S. forces inside one of Saddam Hussein's opulent Baghdad palaces tells the story. Soldiers seized control of the complex and used the palace grounds as a processing area for Iraqi prisoners. Fighting continued, however, around Baghdad and beyond. These images are from Basra, where British forces continue to solidify their hold on Iraq's 2nd largest city. Let's begin this hour with the latest headlines and our Wolf Blitzer in Kuwait City. Wolf.
Thanks very much, Judy. There's been no let-up whatsoever in the U.S. assault on Baghdad, even as American soldiers occupy parts of the Iraqi capital, including the new presidential palace. Coalition warplanes pounded targets tonight around the city. U.S. Army forces advanced on Baghdad from the west as well, and Marines headed into the city from the east. Military officials say the maneuvers prove U.S. forces can move when and where they want inside the Iraqi capital. Meanwhile, samples of what could be chemical weapons material are being flown to the United States for testing. CNN's Ryan Chilcote with the Army's 101st Airborne Division reports the materials were found at a paramilitary camp in Hindia, about 60 miles south of Baghdad. Chilcote is with us now live to tell us what's going on in this potentially significant story. Ryan, for our viewers who may just be joining us right now at the top of the hour, tell us about these dramatic developments.
All right, well, Wolf, we'll start at the beginning. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne 2nd Brigade have been investigating several sites that they've been led to primarily by the local population east of the city of Karbala, and they've been uncovering weapons caches. Now, at a site that they found about 3 days ago, they found a large weapons cache, and they also found outside of it a large number of drums with some kind of chemical in it. Now, they learned very quickly that this facility was an agricultural complex because inside of it, it had a lot of literature about pesticides, and it also had a small warehouse and I was there for all of this, where they have a large number of insecticides. So they did an initial test to see, given the fact that they had found such a large weapons cache at this site, to see what those chemicals were in the drums. They were actually hidden behind the agricultural complex, covered up with like a reed mat, if you will, in some bunker-type holes. They did a test initially for nerve agent and for blister agent, and those tests came up mixed. Today, the development is they brought in a higher level of, more sophisticated level of testing. It's called the Fox vehicle. They brought this Fox vehicle in to do some more testing. They tested again for both nerve and for blister agents, chemical agents, and they came up positive. Now, nothing is simple about any of this. These tests can obviously be erroneous, and there will need to be more tests, and that's something that the 101st Airborne is planning on doing. They've already requested from 5th Corps, which is the umbrella, the Army's umbrella above the 101st Airborne, actually above the 101st and the 3rd ID here in country. They've requested another set of experts to come in, but so far they have positive for both a blister agent and a nerve agent. And according to the one-star General Benjamin Frakely, there's really two ways, they say, to understand these results. Let's have a listen to what the General said about their findings so far.
This could be either some type of pesticides, because this was an agricultural compound, and the literature inside the compound talked about dealing with mosquitoes and other type of airborne vermin, and it was right along the Euphrates River, very close to Euphrates River. But on the other hand, it could be a chemical agent, not weaponized.
And to explain that, Wolf, it's possible that you can get a false positive, if you will, a misleading result from these tests if you have a lot of insecticides around. I mean, effectively, insecticides sort of act like nerve agents. They attack the nervous system of insects. So if you're going around with a lot of very high-tech, very sensitive equipment, it is possible, according to the experts that I've been talking to here on the ground from the U.S. Army 63rd Chemical Company, from the 51st Chemical Company, the experts that have been involved in exploiting, as the military puts it, these sites, it is possible that you could get a false positive. But like I said, so far they believe there is two possibilities. One, they've encountered a chemical agent that they really don't know a whole lot about, they haven't seen before, or two, that this is an insecticide. Wolf?
Ryan, and tell our viewers about some of the soldiers, what happened. Some of them became ill after exposure.
Thank you. Foreign news reports now from both Kuwait and Iran of popular uprisings in Baghdad. Now, we listen to those with some degree of interest because they are so well placed and have such good sources within Baghdad. Iraqi citizens, according to those two news agencies, have turned against Iraqi soldiers to some degree. Some 35 or so soldiers have been killed, according to those two news agencies, though we can't independently confirm that. All of this as Saddam's information minister claims the coalition forces have not entered the capital and are committing suicide at the gates of Baghdad. From Studio B, let's go live now to Greg Palcott, who's in Amman, Jordan. Greg?
Hey, Shepard, at the very least, we're getting reports of a very tense situation in Baghdad tonight as U.S. troops set up shops right in the center of that city. Now, what we have heard is that there have been at least 3 explosions in the eastern part of the city. Iraqis also said to be firing on American troops in the city, particularly from the Al Rashid Hotel. That's where Fox News reporters and other foreign journalists have stayed in the past. Apparently, some sniping being done on American patrols. Also, artillery being fired at American troops, shooting across the Tigris River to the presidential complex at which the American troops are remaining at this very moment. There were at least 2 presidential complexes which the 3rd Infantry Division took over in that very bold move this morning. That bold move which is basically also uncontested to a large degree by Iraqi forces. They also spent time driving around the main government area on the western side of the city, moves which, it must be noted, the Iraqi information minister, Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, has vehemently denied to the foreign press gathered in the city. And this is what he had to say.
لا وجود للعلوج الأمريكان في مدينة بغداد. There is no any trace, no any existence to the American troops or British troops in Baghdad at all.
Now, not present at the presidential palace is the president himself, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, or his entourage. He did make an appearance with some of his aides, not included, by the way, one of his sons, Uday. This appeared on Iraqi state television. Of course, that tape undated, as most of the tapes have been that we have seen in the last couple of weeks. Shepard, it should be noted, and I think you have been underscoring the significance of many of these moves by the 3rd Infantry Division in the center of Baghdad, particularly at that National Parade grounds where the statue of Saddam Hussein was blown up, where there are memorials to past battles, past wars which have been engineered by Saddam Hussein, in which hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have died. A very, very important symbolic move. Finally, Shepard, as you have noted and as we have been hearing from sources both in Iran and in Kuwait, there are reports of uprisings even within the city of Baghdad against Ba'athist elements, against Saddam elements. We have absolutely no confirmation of that, so we cannot confirm these reports. No indication that that is accurate. But of course, that kind of activity is exactly what the American troops, the coalition troops, have been going for in this move, in this very, very, as has been described many times today, audacious move right into the heart of the regime of Saddam Hussein. That's our view from Amman. Back to you, Shep.
Greg Palcott, thank you. British troops are now in control of the city of Basra in southern Iraq, and a notorious accomplice of Saddam Hussein himself, his cousin, the leader of the southern part of the nation, Chemical Ali, as he's known for having infamously gassed his own people by the tens of thousands, is now believed to be very likely dead. From Studio B, let's go to Jonathan Hunt, who's in the neighboring city of Kuwait City across the border. Jonathan?
Hey, Shep. Yeah, as the Brits break the back of the regime in southern Iraq, it does appear that they may have got this notorious henchman of Saddam Hussein, known as Chemical Ali, Ali Hassan al-Majid. He is Saddam Hussein's cousin, and he is thought to be responsible for some of the regime's worst atrocities, including the 1988 gassing of Kurds in northern Iraq. That killed thousands and earned al-Majid that name, Chemical Ali. He's also thought to have been involved in the brutal crushing of a revolt by Shiites in southern Iraq after the 1991 Gulf War. His home in Basra was targeted by coalition aircraft over the weekend, and officials believe those airstrikes killed al-Majid, sending a powerful message to the people of Basra and beyond that the regime's days are coming to an end. The British grip on Basra is getting ever tighter. British troops have now moved into what they call the heart of the city, and they say they're there to stay. Among the symbolic parts of the city they've taken are the presidential palace compound, once a headquarters of the Fedayeen militia. US fighter planes hit suspected militia positions around the palace overnight, and by the time British troops entered the palace gates, there was apparently very little sign of life. Right now, British forces are sweeping through the old part of city. That's a dangerous mission because it has to be done on foot because of the narrow streets in that area. Other British soldiers, though, are patrolling different parts of the city in decidedly relaxed fashion, some with their helmets off. Another display of confidence, which seems to be convincing the people of Basra that the regime's reign is over. And there are now reports that some of those local people themselves may be turning on the remnants of the Iraqi militia. British officials say that they expected that kind of uprising all along. One official telling me earlier today that this was bound to happen. It was simply a case of the locals realizing that the days of what he called the Ba'ath Party goons are finally over. Shep?
All right, Jonathan Hunt live for us at our newsroom in Kuwait City. Jonathan, thank you very much. It was early this morning, shortly after 2:30 Eastern Time, that the United States military, for the first time, entered the parade grounds, at a spot at which Saddam Hussein always reviews the troops. They took it over quite quickly, and though there were denials from inside the country, the pictures were live and exclusive to Fox News. Greg Kelly continuing his extraordinary reporting. Let's take a look back now.
Chalabi has arrived near the town of Nasiriyah in Iraq. Chalabi is a leader of the opposition group, the Iraqi National Congress. He's calling on his countrymen to help remove the final remnants of Saddam Hussein's regime. And a major developing story, NBC's Dana Lewis reporting that a possible Iraqi chemical weapons site has been discovered near Karbala by soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division. More tests are being done, but U.S. Defense Department officials say preliminary data indicates that Tavan, sarin, mustard, and a blister agent were present on these barrels found on an Iraqi military compound. The Pentagon cautioning these tests preliminary. Nothing has been authoritatively confirmed yet. A reminder, we bring you the latest headlines every 15 minutes here on MSNBC. Right now, I want to turn things over to Pat Buchanan and Bill Press in Washington for more on that very troubling find by the 101st. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Lester. We pick it up right there. In fact, I'm Bill Press here with Pat Buchanan. When it comes to weapons of mass destruction, as Dana Lewis has been reporting exclusively here on MSNBC, it looks like U.S. troops may have finally found the smoking gun. Here to talk all things biological and chemical, former Chief UN Weapons Inspector and MSNBC analyst David Kaye. David, good to see you. There have been several false alarms over the last day. This is an agricultural facility where these 14 or so barrels marked produit d'urgence in French, an urgent or important product, emergency product. Initial tests show traces of sarin, mustard gas, tabin, is it, and a blister agent. We see it's found there in the trench. Do you think this is the real stuff? Is this the smoking gun we've been looking for?
Bill, this is a very important political decision, to smoking gun. You shouldn't rush off half-cocked. They've done 3 tests, but the tests are not the definitive tests. That's a laboratory gold standard that has to be done now. I say there are many things that look like it. Believe it or not, that's how we discovered the Iraqis hid stuff, exactly like that. Remember, they have no OSHA, no EPA there. They don't have to worry about the standards. And we even found that same cocktail. I was up on the radio net the day the inspectors opened a warhead, and they said, I'll clean it up for MSNBC, but can you believe this has both mustard agent and VX? We don't know how to deal with that.
Now let me ask you this, if they were looking down the barrel at American and British troops coming in, and they've known for the last couple of months we were coming in, look at this trench. Is that where their biological and chemical weapons would have been stored, in those dirty old drums in that trench?
It's not where weapons would have been stored, but excess product, quite likely. I mean, they did it before.
I mean, let me ask, I'll be honest, take a look at those barrels. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say this is, if you've got this horrendously dangerous material, you sit it out in 55-gallon drums and 25-gallon. Did you find any in precisely that form when you were a UN inspector?
Inspectors found it in that form, Pat. And believe it or not, they loaded their weapons. The guys loading the warheads did it without protective gear. 20% of their workers were lost each year to the process of manufacturing and loading the chemical products.
You know, look, I did see something very impressive Saturday, and I heard you on MSNBC. And I was rather remarkable. One of them was an artillery shell which had an opening at the end, and another, I believe, was sort of an artillery shell or a missile type thing which had a number of sort of openings. It looked like you might put agents in there for a binary weapon that on explosion the two would go together, and I think that's how, even when we were doing it, we had binary weapons, did we not?
We had binary weapons. That looked like one. The most interesting thing about it was the Cyrillic writing on it, which means we'll be able to...
It's Russian.
Well, it could be Bulgarian as well. It could be Ukrainian, and that's being run down right now. But there again, you want to be careful, nail it exactly, not early announcements that you have to correct yourself on.
If you went to an agricultural facility anywhere in the United States where there's extensive use of pesticides and did some initial tests, would you also come up with initial readings of biological, chemical potential weapon stuff?
On the first test they did is possible. They are all of the class of organophosphates. The second and third test they ran is much better and higher sensitivity. It would be unusual in a U.S. process to do that. The problem is Iraqi industrial standards are not up to ours, so it's still possible.
NPR is also reporting, in addition to this, a second possible find of 20, as I understand it, medium-range missiles that were loaded with sarin and mustard gas. So again, not confirmed, but do you know anything you can tell us about that?
Well, if it turns out that it's actually loaded with a liquid, I mean, there's no chance you load a missile with pesticides. That's not a way for crop spraying. So that's very likely to be a chemical agent. But there again, we have to wait to be sure it's liquid loaded and do the testing.
All right, David, here's why there's great skepticism. Number one, as Rumsfeld said today, look, we've had these reports again and again and again. They all turn up negative, false, so we're not going to say anything about this. Secondly, if they're going to use this stuff, and they've got all these tons and tons and tons of it, they haven't fired a single artillery shell or a missile with this junk in it, even though they fired the missiles, tried to fire them into Kuwait, a couple of hit. They fired artillery shells at us. Why aren't they using this stuff if they got it?
Well, Pat, let's take that second one because that's really important. There was never an incentive for them to use it early. They were gaining tremendous advantage in the Arab world as well as among some of our sometime allies about skepticism about whether they had WMD. I even heard some of that here before. But when you got when you got close to Baghdad,
but close, you got a guy. I just saw an American officer sitting there in Saddam's high chair, right in his big palace. They're all having a great time,
Pat,
and he hadn't fired anything yet.
That's the beauty of the strategy. While the chattering class a week ago was condemning this plan for not having enough troops, they were driving to Baghdad 400 miles in 7 days, destroying. He lost his ability.
The strategy is excellent, but again, not one weapon fired with a chemical weapon.
By the time they got close enough where it made tactical sense to use it, he no longer had command of his forces.
David Kaye, we only have a minute left. It was rumored at one time, reported at one time, that you had been approached about being the new, temporary at least, interim leader of Iraq post-war. I think you had enough sense not to take the job. No. But were you in that position right now? What could you tell us? We're going to be talking about this a little later on broadcast. What would you be looking for putting together in terms of an interim government? Staying there a year yourself or getting the hell out as soon as you could and putting some Iraqis in charge?
Look, the key thing is to establish an effective law and justice system. If you look at Afghanistan, Kosovo, and Bosnia, what went wrong? Organized crime came in because we didn't get police and justice system, and insecurity reigned. And no political structure could gain a toehold. So the first thing is to do that. In terms of American interest there, 6 months is my max. I want to be out of Dodge by then and turning it over to Iraqis. It's because not just of Iraq. You're in the center of the Arab nation. You don't want Americans there as long-term pashas.
There's going to be a great battle over this, though, isn't there, David?
There is indeed.
David, thank you very much. It is always interesting. We appreciate it. We'll have you back again, and frankly, we'll see if that turns up negative or positive. Right now, we do have some positive news from Wall Street.
Whoa, do we ever?
And Michelle Caruso Cabrera is going to bring it to us. Michelle, what is happening? It was very good news earlier today.
Yeah, absolutely. We still have the markets higher, not quite as high as they were in the early going. Take a look. The Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by about 83 points. That looks good. It was higher by more than 200 points in the very early going of the session, so it's definitely come off of its highs, but still, the Dow holding 83.60 right now. The S&P 500 is higher by nearly 8 points.
Are slowly, steadily driving toward the main critical highway that connects the two largest cities still under the control of forces loyal to Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. Now, those cities are Mosul and Kirkuk. So it does appear that possibly what's going on in the north is that the coalition forces are essentially surrounding the major cities, not going in as the tactic, in fact, that they followed to a certain extent in the south as well. Judy?
So, Ben, we're beginning to get a picture of what the coalition may have in mind in the north. Ben Wiedemann, thanks very much. That picture of the elderly gentleman with a rifle was something in your report. Ben Wiedemann, thanks very much, reporting from near Erbil.
The one network, fair and balanced, Fox News Channel. From the Pentagon, revealing interview, rare insight. With the military, exclusive reporting, live. From the front line, with our troops, breaking news. Throughout the region, the pulse of the Mideast made clear. Fox News Channel, real journalism, fair and balanced.
A summit begins in Belfast. I'm Paige Hopkins. President Bush is in Northern Ireland to meet with his main coalition partner in the war in Iraq. Mr. Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair hold a two-day summit in Belfast. Tomorrow they'll be joined by Ireland's Prime Minister. Iraq tops the agenda, but discussions will also include the Middle East and Northern Ireland. Coalition forces may have found some of Saddam Hussein's illegal weapons of mass destruction. Preliminary tests show that substances found in a military training camp in central Iraq may contain deadly nerve agents. Further tests, however, are being run. American forces are spending the night in Baghdad. They rolled into the center of the city early today and seized Saddam Hussein's newest presidential palace. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Richard Myers says that sends a message that Saddam's regime is finished. In southern Iraq, British forces now control most of Iraq's second largest city, Basra. They smashed into one of Saddam Hussein's palaces and are flushing out pockets of Iraqi militia fighters. The second shipment of humanitarian aid arrives at the Iraqi port in Qasr. The British naval ship Sir Percival had to be escorted by an American minesweeper because of the danger of Iraqi mines.
Yeah, that's my mic.
And at a port here at home, violence erupts when police try to disperse hundreds of anti-war protesters blocking a road near the port in Oakland, California. Cops chased protesters and fired rubber bullets and beanbags. Several dock workers were injured. They were not involved in the protest and say police used excessive force. Those are the latest headlines. I'm Paige Hopkins.
The President of the United States meeting with the British Prime Minister Tony Blair in Northern Ireland to talk about the war in Iraq, among other things. We have Team Fox coverage on Operation Iraqi Freedom. Mike Tobin live at Sitcom in Qatar. But first, the White House correspondent Wendell Goler traveling with the President. He's live for us in Belfast. Wendell?
Shepard, the President and Prime Minister Tony Blair have begun their roughly 20-hour summit with a working dinner at a 17th century castle outside Belfast, Northern Ireland. They'll be talking about what comes after the war, the administration of Iraq, rebuilding of the country. The President's aides had said that did not mean that the two leaders believe that the war is almost over, and yet Secretary of State Powell says that the hostilities phase of the war in Iraq is drawing to an end, and the President and Prime Minister are going to be talking about what comes after. Powell spoke to reporters aboard Air Force One as it made the flight across the Atlantic. He said the President and Prime Minister will talk about creating a representative government that includes all facets of Iraqi society. But before that happens, there will be an interim phase, perhaps 6 months or more, in which Iraq will be run by the United States military. This according to Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. Aides say the President and Prime Minister will agree on a role for the United Nations to play. It will not be a controlling role, which the Russians, the French, and the Germans seem to want. Officials say since the coalition had the will to go to war with Iraq, it will take a leadership role in rebuilding the country. And UN Secretary General Kofi Annan made clear today it's a role that he really doesn't want anyway.
You have to be very careful here. Each crisis has its own peculiarities. Iraq is not East Timor, and Iraq is not Kosovo. There are trained personnel, there is a reasonably effective civil service, there are engineers and others who can play a role in their own country. And as we've said before, Iraqis have to be responsible for their political future.
A part of the reason for the summit is to guide the United Nations Security Council to smoothly come up with a role for the UN to play in post-Saddam Iraq. U.S. relations with Germany, France, and Russia took a big hit in the Security Council deliberations before the war, and officials don't want a repeat of that. And while they're here, President Bush and Prime Minister Blair will be looking for a way to get the Protestants and Catholics here in Northern Ireland to re-implement the Good Friday Accords. The joint power-sharing government here was dissolved by the British last October after an IRA spy was found in the office of the Protestant First Minister. Since then, Prime Minister Blair has put a good deal of pressure on the IRA, and the president's presence here is meant to give Blair a bit of support. Shepard?
Wendell Goler live for us in Belfast. Wendell, thanks. Here with more on the president's trip, our Washington managing editor, Britt Hume. Britt, good to see you.
Good to see you, Shep.
Why there? Why now?
Well, there really is, Shep, a disagreement between the U.S. and the U.K. on the role of the UN in a post-war Iraq. But this is essentially a political and diplomatic matter in this sense. President Bush is trying to do everything he can to support Tony Blair. This is about the third or fourth little snap summit that they've had together. When they get together, it happened in Washington. It happened, remember, with the Spanish and Portuguese and the Azores. Now we have this. And the idea is to show Blair as a major player in all this, an equal partner. The idea is also to try to smooth over the disagreement on the UN. The UN is a much more popular institution in Britain and a much more credible institution in Britain among the public than it is in the United States, which means that for Mr. Blair, trying to get the UN involved is politically helpful in a way that doesn't matter particularly to President Bush. On the other hand, President Bush and his administration are not eager to have the UN get deeply involved in a situation where they think it will make it worse after the UN's failure on weapons of mass destruction over so many years, and after the UN's failure in a number of other places to prevent war or to impose any kind of civil administration. So this will get worked out, but the more they're shown together and the more equal Blair looks, the more clout he appears to have, and that no doubt helps him at home.
I guess the argument is it's these nations and these groups who put their politics on the line and put their lives on the line, and as a result, they should get a leading role here.
Well, that's right. And of course, the UN would be, if the UN got control of, early control of important elements of a post-war administration of Iraq, which I'm not sure the UN wants. Kofi Annan has signaled otherwise, but whatever role the UN plays might be the entry point for some of the countries that really stiff the U.S. and Britain on help on this war to try to get their hooks into the process as well. And that's something that I'm sure Tony Blair doesn't want, although he's got to be careful about how he says it. And it is certainly something the Bush administration does not want at all, particularly as regards Russia and France.
Same time this is happening, Britt, there's a quote from Colin Powell today saying that the hostilities phase of this war is coming to a conclusion. Is it your sense and a sense in Washington now that these dramatic developments from overnight point to a very quickly ending war here now?
Well, I don't think he meant, I don't know what you mean by quickly, and I think
I don't either, really.
And I think if you ask Powell the question, he'd go all cautious. I think he means is that the back of this thing has probably been broken with when they overcame whatever resistance there was from the only serious military force that the Iraqis have. That was those Republican Guard divisions, which have been overwhelmed and obviously badly mauled and appear to be fighting in no organized way at this stage. That means that militarily, the outcome has really been determined. That doesn't mean that it's safe now for the U.S. to go rolling into Baghdad and expect to have flowers thrown. These missions that are being undertaken obviously are daring and somewhat dangerous, and the U.S. has taken some casualties. I know that some military officers expect there may be some counterattacks on U.S. forces at the airport and perhaps elsewhere. So I don't think he thinks this is going to be over in 24, 36 hours. I think what he means is that the end is relatively near.
Britt, we don't hear from the leaders. The highest ranking person we've seen recently, we're sure who he is the Minister of Information. It's curious.
Guy's a walking Saturday Night Live skit.
On one side of the street is our reporter saying we're here, and on the other side of the street is him. But I just wonder if you have gotten any sort of sense of how this thing might all wrap up. They don't sound like ones want to surrender in some grand fashion.
No, they don't. And of course, there is this question, Shep, and this is really the key question. At what point do the Iraqi people sense sort of collectively that the regime is done? Saddam Hussein's death or capture is less important than that, although it may turn out that is necessary to get the Iraqi people to really believe it. I mean, the Iraqi people really do seem to regard Saddam Hussein as a kind of vampire who has to be dragged out into daylight and have a stake shoved through his heart before they can believe he's finished. and that is what the U.S. The U.S. team in Iraq is confronted with. is you've got to break the hold of fear, and you're seeing it beginning to break in some places. And you've obviously seen that the U.S. forces have had some help in Baghdad, but that phase of it is what they're working on now. And when that comes, I think we'll all know it, although we can't specify exactly how it will be or what form it will take.
Brit Hume, live in Washington. Brit, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, Brit's back in about 2.5 hours for a special report with Brit Hume. We had a comprehensive wrap of all the day's news in the war. And certainly the sun has set now in Baghdad. They're in daylight savings time as we are now, just about 40 minutes past 11 p.m. So they're well into the night, and it's the next few hours, the times of the night when things seem to get a little bit interesting. So we'll be watching. We have a lot of live remotes coming in, and we'll take you there as things develop. The weapons of mass destruction that U.S. inspectors couldn't find. From Studio B Live now to Mike Tobin at Central Command Headquarters in Qatar. Mike?
Well, Shepard, senior defense officials are telling Fox News' Brett Baer that these initial tests found in the field, or done in the field, are showing the presence of sarin, tobin, and a chemical known as lewisite. The tests being conducted by members of the 101st Airborne Division east of Karbala. 2 of these agents are nerve agents, said to be more volatile than the VX nerve gas. The way they kill whoever is exposed is by causing convulsions, ultimately causing asphyxiation. This lewisite is an odorless liquid. Sometimes it will smell like flowers, and what it does is causes the skin to blister up. If inhaled, it causes the inside of the lungs to blister up and ultimately causes the lungs to fill with fluid. Again, the cause of death there would be asphyxiation. Now, Central Command is not confirming these field reports, but made it clear that the coalition forces have found that the regime possesses the will and the means to deliver chemical weapons.
Where we saw them, we destroyed them. And we also moved into areas where they had been launched in the early days, particularly toward Kuwait, to take away the opportunity for them to actually deliver those. That work continues, but there's also still capability. While it hasn't been found, we're reminded that because we haven't found it, it's still there.
And as night fell, explosions rocked the heart of the Baghdad capital. U.S. Central Command says only the people fighting know who is firing what right now. CENTCOM does confirm U.S. armor is in that area. Coalition aircraft have been flying sorties over Baghdad now 24/7. The explosions could be the result of airstrikes, could be a U.S. ordnance, could be fired by any number of Iraqi forces on the ground in Baghdad. I also want to tell you that General Tommy Franks set foot in Iraq today. He went to 3 separate locations. We don't have a whole lot of details beyond that. We know at the end of the day he set foot in Manama, Bahrain, where the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet is located. He spoke to reporters there about the potential of chemical weapons being found. He said a large number of sites are being looked at, a large number of sites are being tested, and as soon as they get some hard, fast results, they'll make it public. Shepard, back to you.
Mike Tobin, live for us at Central Command. Mike, thanks very much. I want to get the latest now from the northern front. From Studio B, let's go live by the video phone to Chris Klein, who's in northern Iraq and on the night scope as well. Chris, what can you tell us?
Shepard, I am, as I was last evening, standing on ground that only earlier today was Iraqi-held territory. Essentially following an intense but brief battle yesterday in the just shortly after dawn hours, a combined force of local Kurdish Peshmerga, Kurdish guerrillas, and allied special forces, as well as intensive allied air action, a position not far from here, just a few kilometers away, a town of considerable size, was overrun by allied forces. Now, throughout this day, after this remarkable battle, which caused only 1 KIA on the Allied side, the Allies are here together with their Kurdish allies, consolidating their position, sending out reconnaissance patrols, and trying to gauge the strength of the enemy in anticipation of the next move. Shepard.
Chris Klein live in northern Iraq. Coming up from Studio B, Greg Kelly and his extraordinary adventures overnight, the taking of parts of the city, seen live right here.
Mr. Goodwrench, who is this one and only GM expert? I gotta find this guy.
Say to our viewers.
Wolf, I think, is trying to take advantage of that's where some of the live camera positions are outside the building. He also had taken journalists on a tour of parts of the city. He'd even apologized when they came close to an area that there was some heavy machine gun fire going on at the time. Apologized to them, saying he didn't want to put them in danger, but this was the situation in the city at this time. I think trying really here to get the journalists outside to try and prove to them that what he's saying is right, but it's increasingly apparent to those those around him, even those that work for him, that what he is saying is blatantly untrue at this time, Wolf.
Nick Robertson with the latest from inside Baghdad. Nick is monitoring the situation along the border there. Thanks very much, Nick, for that report. Judy, back to you.
Coming up next, Wolf, we're going to look more at the battle for Baghdad. What is next, especially with regard to the role of air power?
And covered with leaves, the Pentagon continues to caution the tests are preliminary. Nothing has been authoritatively confirmed yet about weapons of mass destruction. British troops are now in control over much of Basra. They've taken over a key presidential palace. They are, however, still rooting out the last of the Iraqi paramilitary fighters. Now one of the main problems in the city is looting. Some Iraqis went on a looting rampage at a bank and local hotel. The International Red Cross says the number of casualties in Baghdad is so high that hospitals can no longer keep track of them. The Red Cross says the hospitals are nearly at a breaking point, and it could get worse as the fighting continues. A reminder, we bring you the latest headlines every 15 minutes here on MSNBC. We want to go to Kerry Sanders now. NBC correspondent has been traveling with the Marines through Iraq. He's about 80 miles south of Baghdad right now. And Kerry, we understand you've got information on a possible hostage situation.
Well, about 20 miles to our north, or 60 miles south of Baghdad, 5 Polish journalists traveling in a convoy of 3 vehicles on their own decided to try and head over to Karbala, and they took an exit off of the main highway that heads up to Baghdad. And about 5 kilometers or so off the main highway, as they were going through a small village, they ran into a roadblock that appears to be a roadblock handled by Fedayeen soldiers, the Iraqi military. They were clad in black uniforms, and as that first vehicle approached with the Polish journalists, the other 2 vehicles stopped short. The Iraqi soldiers ordered the first 2 journalists, one from Polish radio, the other from TVN 24 Polish television, out of the vehicle. They were then asked to get down on their knees, and at that point, the other 2 vehicles with the other Polish journalists decided to throw the vehicles in reverse and get out of there, and the Fedayeen military, Iraqi soldiers, began firing at their vehicles as they sped away. The 2 vehicles that got away had 3 journalists. They made their way down to the point where I am, about 80 miles south of Baghdad, and they came up to the U.S. Marines desperately begging for help, saying that their 2 colleagues had been taken hostage by the Fedayeen, and they had their satellite phone on, hoping against hope that somehow their friends were being nothing more than ordered on the side of the road to have their vehicles and equipment stolen, and hoping that somehow these 2 Polish journalists would have been able to get their satellite phone out to make a phone call to say that they were okay, but the phone never rang with the journalists who got free. They spoke to the U.S. Marine Corps here for several hours, detailing all of the specifics of what had taken place. The area we're talking about is beyond the control of the U.S. Marine Corps, but falls into an area that the U.S. Army is controlling. So there are efforts to get the U.S. Marine Corps reports over to the U.S. Army to see if there's anything they can do. The U.S. military says that it would not be a rescue necessarily of journalists. They're not here to rescue journalists, but they are here to intervene when third world nationals are taken hostage. And in this case, they are third world nationals taken hostage. So the U.S. military is looking at it, but they also send up a cautionary note to the Polish journalists who have been inquiring that it's possible that they may have been executed, and they also need to understand that it takes time. They can't just roll in without much information and begin shooting. They have to have more information, and they use the story of the American POW Jessica Lynch, who they followed for 9 days before they actually executed a rescue mission. So this could take some time, and because it falls into this sort of complicated area where the reports first came to the U.S. Marine Corps and then have to get over to the Army, it might actually add a little bit more of a wrinkle to the process. But there are some very anxious journalists here and some very anxious families back in Poland tonight, wondering if their loved ones have been executed or if they're just being held by Fedayeen Iraqi military.
And Kerry, this brings up the whole issue of unilateral reporters. We recall what occurred to the ITN crew in this southern Iraq early on in this war. Have there been a lot of reporters who are working outside the military, and is it becoming a hindrance or a source of irritation to the military?
It's not a source of irritation to the military. They understand how reporters work. As a matter of fact, the reporter here from TVN 29, or TVN 24, the Polish TV station, at one point he was an embedded journalist. He decided to give up his embedded situation and go off unilaterally with his colleagues. I have run across a few journalists who are unilaterally traveling through the area. Some are friends of mine, and they know it's a tremendous risk. Most of them try to fall in behind U.S. military convoys and travel with the U.S. military. The U.S. military has been more than accepting of unilateral journalists to travel with them. In this particular case, the Polish journalists and the three I met spoke fluent English, decided that they wanted to head over to Karbala because they'd heard some reports that Karbala was now in control of the U.S. military and was safe. And so on their own, without following any convoys, decided to take a side road, and it looks like it really boils down to taking a wrong turn at the wrong time, because they went down a road that clearly they weren't familiar with and wound up going through a village where they ran into this roadblock.
One of the many frightening stories out of Iraq. Kerry Sanders. Kerry, thanks for checking in. We will continue to look forward to your reports and an update perhaps on the Polish journalists who right now are missing. Let's go back to Pat Buchanan and Bill Press in Washington. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Lester. A dramatic story there. And the President of the United States, as you folks know, is over in Belfast right now speaking with Tony Blair. One of the points at issue is what role for the United Nations in the governance of Iraq after Saddam Hussein. Our guest is Randy Schuneman of the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq. Randy, the United States is going to insist that we play the key role along with our British allies, and that basically the UN butt out when it comes to running Iraq. That's pretty much a given, isn't it, no matter what Tony Blair says?
Well, I certainly hope it's a given. I mean, if the UN wants to give a blessing and allow its specialized agencies to come in and humanitarian relief, I think that's fine. But I think the idea that the institution that failed so fundamentally to confront the threat posed by Saddam Hussein should have a say-so in governing Iraq in the future is ludicrous. I don't think it'd be welcomed by the Iraqi people, and it shouldn't be welcomed by the American people.
I think pretty much Kofi Annan's going to be brushed aside when it comes to running this operation, disarming Iraq. But let me ask you this. As Mr. Chalabi of the Iraqi National Congress has shown up in southern Iraq, he says, with 600 fighters. I mean, there's a huge battle between state and defense over whether he should have some kind of formal role there. He's been indicted, convicted of embezzlement and fraud by the Jordanian government. CIA doesn't trust him anymore. He hasn't accounted for funds, apparently. Is Chalabi, the INC, is this the Pentagon's team, as it were, in Iraq?
Well, I think one person, very important person, trusts Chalabi enough to get him to Nasiriyah along with his forces, and that's CENTCOM Commander Tommy Franks. So whatever the CIA may have to say about him, they certainly supported him for 3 or 4 years in the mid-1990s when he worked in northern Iraq with the CIA. I think Ahmed Chalabi is an Iraqi patriot. He has dedicated his life not to exile, but to opposing the Saddam Hussein regime and supporting liberation of Iraq. Certainly hope that someone who is a confessional Shia, secular, small d Democrat has an important role to play in Iraq's future.
I hate to intervene between you two anti-UN people on this panel here, but let me just ask you the question. I mean, so here the United States goes in, basically, with the UK, of course, and, you know, and we liberate Iraq, and then the United States is going to occupy it? I mean, don't we have much greater legitimacy for whatever follows this war if it is under the umbrella of the United Nations rather than a U.S.-planted government?
Well, the UN bill doesn't have a real great track record of promoting democracy. It's got Libya in charge of its Human Rights Commission. Its mission in Cambodia was a disaster, and it hasn't done a great job in Kosovo. The choice isn't between the UN or American general. I think it ought to be Iraqis. I think it's Iraqis, not American generals or UN bureaucrats, that ought to decide how Iraq's going to vote in the United Nations Security Council, if it serves on it, in the Arab League and OPEC. It doesn't have to be Americans or UN bureaucrats.
Well, of course it's got to be.
Has to be well worth it.
General, certainly a lot of activity there and a number of other places to secure, but there's been a great deal of activity outside the city as well, and this talk of what is possibly, though certainly not confirmed, possibly signs of weapons of mass destruction. What can you tell us?
Well, let's go back again to the screenwriter just for geographic purposes here. We heard the reports here today at Karbala that they've found a significant find of what at least initially appears to be elements of sarin, tabun, and blister mustard gas, if you will. That goes along with a finding not so long ago at Hindaya of the same thing, as well as the findings of suits, atropine, which is the antidote for chemicals, and training manuals and other indications that there is a fairly broad complex of chemical capability as part of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. My guess is, as time goes by, we will continue to find more and more of these sites across Iraq.
General Moore, thank you very much. We'll get back as developments come in, and we certainly have reason to believe that this could be a very busy night. Now approaching midnight in Baghdad, and we'll be having Team Fox coverage, of course, throughout the evening. Our embedded reporters are getting into place, and we hope to hear from them shortly. Next from Studio B, a live look inside Baghdad as coalition troops take Saddam's palace, 2 of them in the capital city, and word from senior defense officials that initial tests showed that banned chemicals in Iraq banned weapons of mass destruction that Saddam said he didn't have. They are initial reports, not being confirmed by the Pentagon. Some field generals, in fact, saying this is an agricultural site. These are pesticides, but there is widespread speculation that they could, in fact, be building blocks for weapons of mass destruction. At any rate, it's a long, hard search. We'll be along for the ride. You are looking live, the flight deck of the USS Constellation, getting ready for flight ops, which have been happening 24 hours a day. We'll continue to keep you updated as midnight approaches in Baghdad. I'm Shepard Smith in New York. For all of us on Studio B, thanks for trusting us for your news and information. Hope to see you back here this afternoon for the Fox Report, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 Pacific. Until then, stay brave, stay aware, and stay with Fox for your world with Neil Cavuto. Man, Neil, I'm watching this morning, and it's up 250 points.
Yeah, and then it drips away. We think we know why. We're going to get into that, Shepard, but thank you very much. Well, chemical weapons may be found, and Chemical Ali likely definitely dead, and your world is on top of both developments. Now, as things heat up in Iraq, stocks for a while rocketed up in the U.S., then gave up some ground. Why? We'll explore the connection with a roundtable of top military experts and then some top financial experts as well. And what if I told you you are getting your tax break as we speak, only it has nothing to do with taxes, but something far more important and far more useful, gasoline prices coming down yet again, and if oil watcher Phil Flynn is right, maybe coming down a lot more. All that and the debate over Iraq. After the war, even Tony Blair says let the UN back in. Why Senator Trent Lott is saying, not so fast, Tony. We'll talk to him. Your world in a busy one, seconds away. Well, it may be too early to say we told you so, but if the tests are accurate, the U.S. may have just found its smoking gun. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and this is your world. Here now, the latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom. Senior defense officials confirmed to Fox News that large drums of what appear to be banned chemical weapons have indeed been found at a military facility near Karbala. Defense officials say that preliminary tests indicate the drums contain both nerve and blister agents. And more powerful explosions light up the evening sky in Baghdad, the latest bombs going off near a hotel that was once used by foreign journalists. Coalition forces now have control of all roads leading in and out of Baghdad. They have also seized 2 of Saddam's palaces in a bold daylight raid. Our Greg Kelly is sending us these exclusive images, a senior defense official calling it a huge psychological success. And the Brits think that they have KO'd Chemical Ali. Saddam's first cousin and one of the most brutal commanders is believed to have been killed in an airstrike on his home near Basra. And he earned the name Chemical Ali for the 1988 poison gas attack that killed tens of thousands of Kurds. They're still awaiting positive identification, just to make sure. Wall Street, smelling a victory in Iraq, poured money into stocks, the Dow initially surging far more than 200 points, but seeing those gains tamed by day's end. So is this the beginning of the end for Saddam Hussein? Well, we've got Fox team coverage with Major Garrett at the Pentagon and Jonathan Hunt in Kuwait City. Well, have we or have we not found that smoking gun, some chemical weapons or stuff that looks a whole lot like chemical weapons being discovered in central Iraq today? Are they the chemical weapons we have long been seeking. The latest on this significant development, we go to Major Garrett at the Pentagon. Major.
Good afternoon, Neil. And first thing I want to point out is the Pentagon has for a very long time been much more serene about this question of chemical and biological agents in Iraq, saying, look, when this war is over, we're going to find them. And there's not going to be just one smoking gun. There are going to be many smoking guns distributed throughout the country. And today, based on preliminary examination, not of weapons, but of agents, the Pentagon does believe they're at least onto something in Hindiya, which is just south of Karbala, about 60 miles south of Baghdad. What do they believe they're onto? The existence of 3 agents that could be used in chemical warfare. What are they? Sarin and Tabin, which are known nerve agents, and mustard or mustard lewisite, which is a blistering agent. They were found in what is described to Fox News by senior defense officials as a military facility. Coalition forces with the 101st Airborne were led there not by information that existed before the war. There's been a lot of site exploration on sites such as that, but by an enemy prisoner of war, somebody who had once fought on the Iraqi side. Led them to this particular facility, and while there, coalition forces discovered what senior defense officials tell Fox to be multiple gallon drums of these various agents, not put into weapons form, not put into any sort of artillery shells or any other disbursement mechanism, but drums of these agents. Preliminary field tests revealed sarin, mustard lewisite, and Tabin. More specific and much more in-depth tests will be undertaken probably within Iraq and then maybe also back here in the United States to confirm the presence of these agents. But defense officials tell Fox it could be very significant, one of many places where, in fact, agents that could be used in chemical or biological warfare are to be found in Iraq. The defense secretary, though, as is his wont, much more cautious about this subject. He was asked today at the Pentagon briefing to evaluate or at least offer official assessment of these first reports from the field. Here's what he said.
We don't do that. We don't do first reports, and we don't speculate. And I can tell you, it takes days to get samples of things from wherever they are in the battlefield into a first place where they take a look, and then to a second place where things get checked. And I think that the prudent thing in a case like this would be to kind of let the thing play itself out, and we'll see we'll eventually know.
Pentagon says it will eventually know. One thing it does know for sure, Neil, is the state of Republican Guard forces that had been protecting the capital city of Baghdad. And to put it bluntly, according to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers, they are in tatters and in disarray. The chairman offered this assessment of the kind of opposition Republican Guard forces have been able to put up against coalition forces as they've plunged deeper into the capital city. Here's what he said.
The command and control of the Republican Guards is at the point now where the most they can do are sporadic attacks from very, very, very small units.
The import of all this, Neil, is that when coalition forces eventually topple the Iraqi regime, it will be because they overwhelm what remains of the armed opposition. And after that, sources at the Pentagon say that's when the real investigative work on weapons of mass destruction will occur in earnest, because only then, they believe, will those who know the real truth about the various sites, various locations of these either weapons or agents that could become weapons will talk freely and openly to coalition investigators. Neil, back to you in New York.
Major, Rumsfeld was very careful today to say at what point coalition forces would declare victory, whether it's capturing Saddam Hussein or confirmation that the guy's dead or anything like that. Inside the knowledge, what you have of it in the Pentagon, what are they saying? What would be a convincing show of force to indicate the war is won?
Well, there may be many convincing indicators of victory. But even then, Neil, the defense secretary indicated that might not be when the coalition declares hostilities over. And there's a very important legal reason for that. When a coalition, in this case, the United States, the Australians, and the British, declare the end of hostilities, all sorts of legal and sort of political expectations follow from that. Okay, hostilities are over. You're no longer under threat. How are you going to take care of the country? And senior defense officials said to me today, as well as Bret Baier, our national security correspondent, that the existence of hostilities may remain in Iraq long after the regime in Baghdad falls. There could be pockets of resistance, people who'll still want to try to do something on Saddam's behalf, even though he may be gone, to revenge or act in vengeance against coalition forces. And what the coalition will do is try to put this interim authority in place, even though hostilities still exist in some parts of the country, and allow that interim authority to get its legs beneath it as far as the governmental issues are concerned. And only then, when it's ready to transition to maybe a more permanent Iraqi government, will the coalition declare hostilities ended. The benchmark might very well be Afghanistan. American forces are still in Afghanistan, even though there is a provisional government there now. Hostilities have not been declared over in Afghanistan. The Secretary of Defense said today, look at Afghanistan as at least a bit of a parallel to what may play out in Iraq. Neil?
That's interesting. Major Garrett at the Pentagon. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.